It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I was asked to come and talk a bit about my own journey, but also I gave the talk a title. It's so nice to have a familiar face with me on the stage. So I gave the title of Creativity, Changing Lives Through Creativity, and a bit of a strapline of how music and the arts can impact the most vulnerable people in our society. And I was also asked to talk a little bit about my own journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and weave those things together in about 15, maybe 20 minutes, if I'm allowed to go on for that long. And then we are, as Patrick was saying, we're going to have some questions. So do feel free to sort of have a think as I talk about whether there's anything that you want to ask me, either about what I've done in the past or what the work that we do now. So I'm going to try and talk a bit about all of those things. How does that sound? Good? Yes, good. Right, brilliant. So I'm going to start at the beginning, not at the very beginning. I'm going to talk a bit about my academic career to start with. It was very short, as in it pretty much didn't exist. But I did really well at school, and then went to college, took some A-levels, but then discovered rock and roll, and my academic career pretty much stopped at that point. I didn't go on to university. I discovered music. It became a really important part of my life at that time, both the playing of music, the creating of music, and the performing of music. So I was in a college band, and that kind of took priority over sort of everything else that was happening around me at the time. And so that meant that although I kind of had aspirations to go to university, that never really happened. And I ended up in what I'd like to call a character building employment, which basically means, oh God, so sorry, that's my phone. And then ended up in a series of, sorry about this, very unprofessional. Ended up in a series of quite lame jobs. So I ended up working in retail and telesales and did all sorts of various bits of work that kind of were, gave me some interesting skills, but didn't feel like I was really going anywhere. I ended up here, actually, at the university. Does anyone know the ISVR department? It's the Institute of Sound and Vibration Research. And yeah, there's someone over there. And I worked there as an electronic technician. And it was a fairly uninteresting and unchallenging job. I wasn't very good at it, didn't really enjoy it, but I sort of sidestepped into IT support, which also doesn't sound particularly exciting, but bearing in mind this was kind of mid-90s and there wasn't really much in the way of IT in the university. It's kind of hard to imagine, but when I worked over at the ISVR, probably only half of the offices actually had computers in them, and most of them weren't even connected to each other, let alone to the outside world. What they were generally used for was for word processing and playing Minesweeper. Don't know if any of you remember that, a few nods, yeah. So I was working in IT, but it was really interesting time because it was at a time of kind of new, exciting technology. So that meant that I was able to step into a career in IT support, which actually was we were kind of like the rock stars at the time. We worked for some big corporations, and the IT support guys were the ones that kind of pulled up in their convertible cars and things like that. But it was at a time when IT support could kind of attract really sort of good money and stuff. So I found myself with sort of not much of education really, but being able to work in a environment where I was earning good money, and but it was ultimately unrewarding, apart from financially. So I found myself stepping away from IT support into something more creative, and creativity has always been really important to me. So I went into web design. And again, this was really early time in the internet. So this was probably just early 2000s. This is before Facebook and before Google had been around like for 2 years. There was no Twitter or anything. The internet was a very different place than it is now. There was no, you couldn't buy stuff online. It's hard to remember really. But I found myself then in a lot more creative career, working with web design, and ended up in one of these sort of cool design agencies in Camden that had table tennis tables and slush puppy machines and crazy golf and stuff in the basement. And I kind of thought that that was where I wanted to get to in my career, to be doing something creative, sort of cutting edge. But again, didn't really provide anything that was sort of fulfilling for me. In fact, I completely burnt out doing what felt like really sort of pointless web design for corporate clients. So I literally burnt out, actually, and I sort of took myself away for a little bit and travelled around Spain, and then tried to decide what it was that I really wanted to do. And I came back to the music because that was kind of what was sort of inside me. That's what I really, truly loved. I was fortunate, I guess, that I had a little bit of a buffer financially, so I was able to retrain as a sound engineer. So I went to some really exciting studios up in London and trained as a recording and sound engineer in some studios and spent about a year, 18 months making music, supporting artists to record their music, doing production. And it was a really, really exciting, creative time doing something that I was incredibly passionate about. But in stark contrast to my previous work, there was absolutely no money there. And at the time, it was I just started a family, so I needed to actually earn money. So in another kind of odd sidestep in my career path, I ended up going into schools and worked as a teaching assistant in some really tough schools up in North London. Because of my IT background, they kind of snapped me up and for some reason gave me their IT budget to spend, and I very gladly spent it on cool music equipment and music tech and stuff. And what I ended up doing was I would sort of have all of this sort of cool music rigs in these primary schools up in North London, and they'd send kind of the naughty kids to me that have been chewing up the classroom because they hate maths or that they find history really boring and stuff, and they'd send them down to Mr. Salvage, and I would sit down with them and I'd sort of show them how to sort of resample old drum loops and make beats and sort of make backing tracks and stuff, and they absolutely loved it, and it was really truly engaging activity for these guys. And guess what? It was maths and it was history and it was looking back at musical history and heritage and stuff like that. It was sort of my first real experience of it was a bit of a light bulb moment, really, because it was my first real experience of how music and the arts can really engage people. These were people that young people that had been were kind of failing. That was the view of these young people. They were just seen as it's not working for them, education. And yet, if surprise, surprise, give them something that's fun and really interesting, and suddenly they're engaging with it and they're loving it. So that was a really interesting time for me. And then I moved back down to Southampton, where I'm from originally, and I felt like I'd really discovered something that I actually wanted to do, which was to work with young people and work with contemporary music. And I had a good look around in the city to try and find something that provided that. This is now going back to 2007, 2008. So I had a good look around to see what was out there. And there really was nothing in Southampton. There was a strong music service that provided music lessons and ensembles and curriculum support and things like that for young people that wanted to play brass and strings and things like that. That was sort of well catered for. But for young people that were into their hip hop or their rock and indie, there was really nothing for those guys. At the time, I didn't consider myself to be particularly entrepreneurial or ambitious or driven. If I'm completely honest, I was looking for a job that was easy, that I enjoyed. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted an easy job that I loved doing. That was what I was looking for. But there was something about the fact that this this opportunity for young people in the city didn't exist that I kind of clung on to. clung. Yeah, that's a word, clung. So at the same kind of time, I started to look at what else was out there for people in the city and beyond that supported young people to be creative. And I discovered this fascinating world that I didn't know existed, which is, I guess, is called classed as the youth arts sector. I guess it's more community arts these days, but at the time there was a whole series of really interesting organisations, many of which are still exist, including the space that we're in now, that provided creative activities for young people. There was a lot of, in 2007, there was a lot of stuff around the creative curriculum, about arts in education. There was a lot of interest in how do we make classrooms more creative, how do we support young people in education by doing arts and creativity. And this was kind of like the second light bulb moment, really, that there existed a structure, organisational structure that was it wasn't commercial, and it wasn't, sort of strictly speaking, a charity in the commonly known sense of like Oxfam and Save the Children and things like that. It was a kind of a movement, really, of organisations that were non-profit, that were interested in social change and used arts and creativity to enact that change. And I just spent a long time talking to people, getting out there, finding out what was going on, finding out whether this was something I could do. And I took the plunge, and I was working back here again in the ISVR, because it just drew me back in for some reason. And I left on Independence Day, 4th of July, 2008, and just kind of jumped in to set up what at the time I was thinking of like a Southampton community music project. And that's where Soco comes from, so it's Southampton Community. Remember, at the time, I just wanted a job that was easy, that I liked doing. And I had absolutely no knowledge of running a business. I had no knowledge of HR and accounts, and I didn't know about all of that kind of stuff about insurance or writing funding bids or anything. I just felt like something that supported young people to have more positivity in their lives through music just felt like a really good idea. So along with a colleague of mine, John, who we'd known each other for a long time, we just took the plunge and set up Soco. And it took about a year before we really started to get sort of regular work in. We'd managed to build up almost a bit of a reputation before we began, because I was doing so much networking and speaking to so many people that a lot of people knew about Soco, and we'd barely even done any work. But our vision was to provide positive creative activities for young people. That was about 10 years ago. And 10 years on, we've done an awful lot of work in the city and beyond. Just as a few kind of ideas of where we've been and what we've done, we built a recording studio in the east of the city in Thornhill, which we still have today. We took over a big shop unit for 2 years in the centre of Southampton, in the Bargate Centre, which is not there anymore. It's just a big flat bit of land that they're going to build on. We had a shop unit in there, and we opened it up and filled it up with music kit and opened the doors for young people to just come in and play on the digital drum kit, or to produce beats on the Macs, or have a go on the turntables, or play guitars with headphones and stuff. We had that for 2 years. We took over a magistrates court building in Eastleigh and worked with 12 other creative organisations to develop a creative arts community. And that was a really exciting time of working with lots of different filmmakers and jewellery makers and visual artists. And then we've worked with an awful lot of people. We started out working with young people, working in pupil referral units, working in after-school clubs, working in youth settings, recording young people, helping them write music, helping them perform music. But then we've also expanded a lot over the years to work with adult groups. So we work with mental health groups, we work with adults in recovery from substance misuse, we've worked in secure mental health units. Our work with young people has been expanded just because it's needed. It's a lot of extra work for us, but we work in early years settings, we work in special education. Some of our work is quite groundbreaking with young people with profound and multiple learning disabilities. We work in youth justice settings, and we work across the board with many different people. We've raised over £1.7 million of funding to come into Southampton to allow us to deliver all of this work. It's been a really exciting journey of taking something that felt like it would work well in the city and grow it into what is actually a significant project that makes a real impact on people's lives. So we know that it makes a difference because people tell us that the work that we do gets them out of bed, it helps them express themselves, it helps them connect with other people. It stops them drinking, it supports their well-being. So we really, we're very aware of the impacts that our work does, and that kind of makes it almost impossible to stop doing it or to not do it anymore. I mentioned earlier, I talked about how I brought my previous work kind of was well paid and well salaried and stuff like that. This work certainly isn't, but the impact of the work is incredibly rewarding personally for me, so that makes the financial stuff just kind of drop away to some extent. I mean, I feel privileged, I guess, in a way to have had a well-paid career previously to know the difference and how the two compare. That's really useful. But it's really important that, for me, my own social impact is that I can sort of understand what me as a person leading Soco Music Project, how that impact, how I can sort of measure that myself. So that's kind of where Soco is now. I could talk for probably about another sort of 4 hours or something. I'm not going to. Another time maybe. Maybe we could all meet again another time and just sit and chat. That would be lovely. But I just wanted to finish on something really, which is around sort of reflecting, how we reflect on our own social impact as individuals. We are pretty much bombarded with things like understanding our how we impact the environment, how we look after ourselves. Are we exercising enough? Do we drink too much? Are we recycling? What's our carbon footprint, etc., etc.? Are we flying too much? And I think something that's going to become more and more prevalent as we go forward is really thinking about how we measure our social impact. I've not really heard it talked about very much. Maybe I'm coming up with a whole new idea, but I think there's something really interesting about thinking about our societal footprint, what impact we have on society as individuals. It's difficult to measure that because I've just come up with that phrase, and it could be nonsense, but maybe it's something about where we shop, how we vote, how we interact with one another, what we take from people, what we give back. Things like that I think are really, really important. And going forward, it might be something that we reflect on much in the same way that we think, I shouldn't fly, I should make sure I recycle. I think maybe there's something about how we think about our impact on society and the people around us. So that's maybe something to take away and have a think. And if you hear that phrase, societal impact, from someone else, come and let me know, because I'm pretty sure I've just made that up. Who knows? But that's all from me, and I'm gonna take some questions and stuff now. But thanks very much for listening to me, and I look forward to maybe chatting to some of you guys afterwards. Thank you.